Excited to be here this morning. My name is Mark Niebergall. There's the joined in. If you want to catch some slides, there's also some sample code on GitHub with some links in there with the information about the talk. A little bit about me, developing in PHP since about 2005, a master's degree in information systems, bachelor's and a minor's and other stuff. Senior software engineer and team lead. I have a team of a few software engineers, a couple of QA, working on a occupational health screening. This would be your drug testing world, basically. All your random pre-employment drug testing, that kind of stuff. We do basically everything but actually testing the stuff. We manage scheduling it, getting the results back, the call center, all this kind of fun stuff going on. Security, I have the SSCP certifications, CSSLP certification. Those are both from IC Squared. They do the CSSP would be the most famous one that they do. Those are really good certifications if you're interested in security. They have some good professional development along with them. Big into PHP, databases, JavaScript. Love being outdoors. Of course, Utah's a great spot for that. I live just up the road and love heading up the canyon, going out for a hike, going rafting, fishing, whatever we got. All right, PHP versions. Let's get a general feel. Who is on PHP 5.3? PHP 5.3 servers are on PHP 5.3. Okay. PHP 5.4? 5.5? 5.6? Okay. That's about what I thought. Anybody on PHP 5 or PHP 4? Just checking. You never know. Anybody in PHP 4? All right. So we are at the point here. We're about to lose support for PHP 5.4. We're past PHP 5.3, right? We're getting into PHP 5.5. We'll start getting security fixes here soon. So it's a good idea to start looking at the upgrade of PHP 5.6 if you haven't already. And with the onset of PHP 7 coming later this year, you'll definitely want to be ready for that. Upgrading, keeping current is a great way to be able to bounce up to the next version when the next version comes out. State of PHP. PHP 5.3.29 is end of line. PHP 5.3 was released for PHP 5.3 ended August 14th last year. PHP 5.4.40 released April 16th, just recently. It's aging, but I would say very heavily used as the general consensus. PHP 5.5 is current. I shouldn't say that's the current PHP 5.5 version. I would say many servers are probably running PHP 5.5. Most production environments are 5.5. PHP 5.6.8 was released in April, just a couple weeks ago. 5.6.0 has been available since August 28th. So some idea of where we're at, when these versions were released. PHP 7 is under, PHP 5.7 is under development, and PHP 7 is under development. PHP 7 has some exciting stuff. You got PHP 6 Unicode. So PHP 6 was Unicode. It will never be released. There's some discussion. There's a big vote on the internals PHP mailing list. You can go check those out. Read the discussions of why PHP 6 will never be released. And PHP 7 will be up next. It's focused on performance. There's major performance increases in PHP 7. The more compact data structures, just some time compiler, improved variable syntax. There's some discrepancies. There's some issues with PHP array syntax or PHP syntax with variables. If you get into the nitty-gritty, there's some issues there, and a lot of those were addressed in PHP 7 when that comes out. If we have time, we'll go into some live demo. Like I said, you can also look in GitHub on the notes for this presentation. There's a link to all the code that's behind this. For demo purposes, I was using Vagrant with Puppet. You could also use Ansible or Salt or a few others. One was PHP 5.8, and one was PHP 5.6.0. Automatic code sync to keep these in sync, so you can see some of these examples when we get into them. PHP 5.6 incompatible issues. So this is going into what's no longer working when you deploy PHP 5.6. These are things you want to go look into and research before you upgrade, or if you have things like unit test running, or maybe you have Splunk or some other sort of air log watcher, you can keep track of these. Array keys won't be overridden. This is the classic, you don't specify the key, so self-key which is one number. If you're in PHP 5.5, you will run into this. PHP 5.6, you'll get this. So a different syntax when you come out of it. Your data will be different. You'll have more data than you thought. So that's something to note and keep an eye for. If you have good data structure, it shouldn't be an issue, but you may want to check. Out with the old with JSON decode, there's a strictness. It's more strict now. Stream wrappers, peer certs, GMP, resources are now objects. So if you go into the data types, you got an object instead of a resource, which we'll get into why and why it's helpful in PHP 5.6. And encrypt functions are now require valid data, valid keys and vectors. We'll go into some of those examples. These are things you may not be using these, may not be an issue, but if it is, just go check those. Deprecated, calling a method from incompatible context. This would be, for example, you have a static method and you're calling it with the instantiated class with an arrow, right? Or maybe the opposite way around. It's static, but you're calling it with double semicolons or double colons. Here's what you'll get. So incompatible context class is static. So you're calling the isStatic, which is a static method, and you're going to get an error, right? It's a something to. You should be seeing these errors anyways if you have error log turning on, error reporting turned on, in your dev environments. But something to note and to keep an eye out for. HTTP raw post data, still using that one, maybe to catch the raw post. Always populate raw data. You can see some examples here. 5-bit contest PHP input versus the HTTP raw post data. iConvert, MB string encoding settings. This is some default settings. The default character set with UTF-8, that's not what it is now. Input encoding, there's a bunch of different settings. We won't go into all the details here, but these are just things to note, things to look for, and you can go reference. We'll get more into what's new, so that's what's more exciting, right? Changed crypt will now raise a need notice if there's no salt parameter. So if you're trying to call the method without your salt, you'll get an issue. Substring compare will now accept 0 for length parameter. If you were doing that before, you would get a fault. You would fail out because you had the 0 on the end for the length. You'll now get a 0. Probably, hopefully you weren't using that, but maybe you were. Maybe you saw that. Some changed functionality. We have unserialize. We'll pass for unserialized data. Curl at file versus curl file. Just some things, again, to note. Encrypt. Postgres functions are no longer experimental. So if you're using Postgres, PHP 5.6 is a great jump because the Postgres functions they're official now, right? They're not experimental. They moved on. Reflection class, new instance, allows for non-final internal changes. XML reader, get attributes. They normalize some of those so that they return null. They act more the same. They're more standardized in how the XML readers work. New functions. This is the exciting stuff, right? GMP root and the root rem, LDAP, MySQL, OCI8, a bunch of OpenSSL stuff. Sorry, I'll jump back there. A bunch of OpenSSL, new things, new features. The big things, what are some of the big things you've heard about PHP 5.6 that are new? We'll get into those. Those are exciting. They're coming up. Postgres, connect, pull, consume input. So a lot of these are just some base things to note if they're going to be applicable to your project. Here's some of the big new stuff. We got constant scalar expressions. So remember that class constant at the top, and you're trying to do a string concatenation maybe because you have a line length limit on your coding standards maybe, or maybe you wanted to have it be 1 plus 1 or this plus that or concatenate this. Before PHP 5.6, you couldn't do that. You'd run into some errors. You can now do that. You can actually go and use the constants up here and use them to do stuff. You can go and do some string manipulation. You can reference other constants. You can do other things like that. It's kind of nifty, kind of handy. The constants now are no longer static, I guess you would say, as far as when you instantiate them. Once you create them, they're there, but when you go and create them, you can actually have them reference something. So that's very useful. If you run into that issue before, you can now do that. Variadic functions. If you could think of a few built-in PHP variadic functions, this is probably one of the most helpful ones. Array merge, for example, right? You have an array merge, you can throw in as many arrays as you want and merge them all. That's an example of a built-in PHP variadic function. We have the ability to use the dots at the end, and you can pass in a variadic, keep going, see Fibonacci go, so we have the Fibonacci numbers going on, and you'll get all those into the function call without having to go and make a bazillion optional parameters, right? Before you just list them all out. Up to 10 optional parameters, maybe. Now you can just pass it in this way. Very helpful. You can also, you have the null values always passed on, sometimes passed. You can see the output there. So you have the array, the Fibonacci's going, and so on. Always passed sometimes. So once you get past the optional parameter. So variadic functions, good way to clean up your code. Maybe you can pass collections and other stuff. Argument packing. If you've used a language that has splat, that's a common code terminology. PHP calls it argument unpacking officially. Similar to variadic, but it's going the opposite way in. So lots of arguments before. Now we have it passed in. You have lots of arguments, right? So if you do the dot on the array, it's going to send in alligator as the first parameter, bear is the second, camel is the third, deer is the fourth. So it'll go in, send those out one by one rather than having them all go in the same variable. So that would be the splat or the argument unpacking functionality within PHP 5.6. Very useful, again, for cleaning up code. Good way to go and utilize the new functionality. Exponentiation. So with the PHP exponentiation, you can use the double stars. That's a new syntax that's available. Again, like 2 squared, right? You can also star equals. Looks pretty cool, right? It's available though. So think of things within your projects that you're working on. Maybe this could be helpful if you're doing a math related. This may be helpful just for shorter syntax. You can do it before, but this is just a little bit easier, a little cleaner looking. Use constant and use function. This was within namespacing. So if you have collisions with your namespacing, this is a way to help resolve that. I'm not sure this one's overly useful. Generally, there's other ways to get around it. But it's there. If you need to use it, you have namespace collisions. So new stuff. You see, my editor didn't even notice that was invalid at the time. There's some things you can do with that one. So not overly helpful. I'm not going to show this one. This is the upload 2 gig greater than 2 gigs. Is anyone uploading greater than 2 gigs at a time? Hopefully not. You might though if you're doing like a big video or something, right? If you have large files you're working with. You can now do that with PHP 5.6. If that was your project and that's what you're doing, that might be a great reason to upgrade to PHP 5.6. GMP now supports operator overloading. So remember, it changed from a resource to an object. So now you can go in and init the 2. This is the base 10 for decimal, of course. So A, B, and C. And now you can go and do mathematical operations on these. You can actually use them without having to do GMP add or multiply or whatever. So you have, it's a lot cleaner in that sense. You can see the int coming out. 2 plus 4 is 6. So a little bit cleaner if you're using that. It's helpful too to note that if you're using like floats in PHP, you probably want to use a math library or GMP because you'll run into decimal point issues as you get into the data further and further because they round them out if you look at the raw value of them. So GMP now supports operator overloading. A lot cleaner to use, easier to read. Hash equals, timing's attack safe. So before in PHP 5.5, if the hash wasn't equal, the timing was different. So if you go into timing attacks with hashing your passwords, you could tell what they're doing until the timing issues were. Now it'll come out the same timing, whether the password is correct or not, with the password hash checking. So if you're using the hash equals, which in PHP hopefully you are, using the bigger hashing rather than the deprecated PHP, or I shouldn't say deprecated MD5, but out of date MD5, use the hash equals checks instead. Magic method debug info. This one's kind of interesting. Debug. You can define your output, so you can hit up a class and say, "Give me the debug information out of here," and you can, maybe have it return some specific values, have it do some stuff, and have it return that out. You can get that out of there. So that's maybe a helpful one if you're getting debugging. Obviously, there's other ways to debug PHP code. You can, if you get like xdebug set up, you can step into your PHP code. You can error log things out as a common way. I prefer the stepping into the code. That's helpful for me. But this is another way that you can get into getting some help with the code that's going on. By adding a debug info, maybe you can help another developer that comes by afterwards. They can understand why you did things based on what they see in the debug info coming out. Testing PHP builds. Now, PHP has a great way to go and build out, test the different builds. So this would be if you want to help the PHP community, you can go and these are the commands for a Linux box, or Unix-based, I should say. This is the current one, 5.6.9. You can go and pull it down, start, cd into it, configure it, make test, and it'll go do a bunch of things, right? It'll go and spew out this big list. Anyone ever done this before? Guessing not, probably not. I wouldn't say I do this terribly often. Maybe every couple months I'll go and grab the latest one, run it, and submit it off. It looks like this. You get this big spew of files and other things going out. You get a lot of information. You'll see a lot of tests running. It'll go in PHP 5 spec. Various things will be executed. All these tests will go. It takes about 10, 15 minutes by the time you're done. When you are, let's say, testing those builds to get an idea of what's going on. It's a good way to initially test and see how your servers are going to handle the updated versions. One thing I've bumped into recently, upgrading to PHP 5.6. How do you give the rationalizations that you need to upgrade to PHP 5.6 within your servers? If PHP 5.6 didn't offer some of the big enhancements like previous versions, like PHP 5.5, PHP 5.4, where you had traits coming out, you had namespacing, these big magical things that help solve a lot of big problems, short array syntax that came out earlier. PHP 5.6 didn't have any of these earth-shattering new features. It had a few little things coming out, like I mentioned. Some of these are very helpful, but it depends on your specific project, depends on what you're getting into. Variadic functions, like I said, they're really kind of helpful, kind of cool things to be using. And the splat, some cleanup things, generally speaking. As we get into the end of PHP 5 world, as PHP 7 is getting ramped up, I don't anticipate we'll see any more major features coming out specifically for PHP 5, just with the updates coming. But we should see some. But getting buy-in for PHP 5.6, the biggest benefits, of course, are just keeping current. As you look at your current architecture, deciding what you have and what you need, maybe identifying technical debt, maybe identifying various older code bases, maybe if you're on PHP 4 still, or maybe PHP 5.2, 5.1, I don't know, whatever you're on. Take the jump, take the time to upgrade where possible. There are some issues that I've seen with PHP 5.6 upgrades. For example, with CentOS, I can't remember which version it is, 6. It's not native in the repos yet, so that might be something else you might have to watch, see if it's available in the repositories by default. Otherwise, you'll be compiling your own PHP versions. That's something to note and take notice of, because that may become an issue. It may not. I don't know. Kind of depends on what you've got going. So take a peek, see what you've got. So I'm going to pull up some sample code. We're going to jump into some of this so you can see more of what's going on. This keyboard is not attached there, so we'll jump into the code here. Let's see the best way to get into that. I'm going to grab this. So we got some sample code. We can test around with it, play around with it. That's not going to be helpful. Let's see, where did that go? Let's see, what's the best way to do this? We'll keep this simple with how it does this. We'll just use a simple IDE like Notepad, right? So super simple. Oh, come on. We got the sound going too. Sorry, a whole bunch of old musings. So let's go and what kind of examples would you guys like? What would be most helpful to see? Was there anything you want to try out? Let me fire up a couple VMs here. So this will be a vagrant box we'll fire up here with PHP 5.6. So we can take a look at some of the code examples there. And I will, this might be easiest to see in PHP Storm. What IDEs do you guys use? VI? Everybody using VI? Good one for good generic stuff. Any PHP Storm users? PHP Storm? Let's see. I'm going to pop this off here just for a second. Let's see. All right. So getting into the PHP 5.6 specific examples. See if we can make this bigger. I made it so, let's see. That's not really, is that viewable enough? Yep, okay. Let's make sure this box is up. Almost up. So I apologize with the keynote. It went a little long. We didn't have time to get the VMs up before time. Let's see, so the pop-up Chrome, so we can see this. So PHP 5.6, incompatible. So the array keys, that was the first example. So this would be the example where we had the array key where you had, if you have integers is defined as 1, and then you had another adding maybe a string to it. Before in PHP 5.5 you would run into issues where it wasn't as it would override that key. You would lose that data. So this is a potential data loss, change the functionality depending on what you're doing. Keep in mind. We'll do here. I'll pull up the I thought it was PHP 5.5. No. No, we'll just go with that. We'll just go with the PHP 5.6. You can see it. So throw us over here. you can see the code and the websites side by side. All right, so this would be the incompatible. This clicker's so as you see the example there with the array keys. Again, so you get into some data issues there that could potentially become issues. JSON decode. This was a difficult one to reproduce because the strictness changed. Before it was more loose. So if you go into, let's see. It just dealt with if you're using strings versus booleans versus integers with how it would actually work. So if you aren't careful with how your JSON data, the data you're using is going to be transformed, and there were issues. You can see the last errors, the ends. Generally speaking, this one won't be an issue, but just in case, you do have that. Let's get into some of the maybe some of the more exciting ones, the variadic functions. Oops. So we'll jump over to that one. This would be the example here then with the, I'll shrink that down so you can see it a little better. Let's do this. What would you like to see? What can we change on this one? If you mixing variadic with splat is kind of a fun one to mess around with as far as changing it around so that they work together differently. I think they go side by side very well if you can use variadic with splat to reduce your number of variables passing in. As a big note too with the splat, you can also do type hinting. So if you have it, you wanted to say it wants to be a specific object, that'll ensure that all the values within that splat are variadic or of that specific type hint. So if you want to make sure they're all arrays, or if you want to make sure they're all of some sort of model, or if you want to make sure there's something, they'll all be that, and it'll enforce that. So that's a very helpful one from that data perspective. And you can go and ensure that it's going to be data-wise correct. So you can see the you've got the sum, always the sum, sometimes going on. With the variadic functions. Use extended. So going over to the splat, we'll jump over here to the splat functions. Similar kind of thing. We can go and with the splat, as I was talking about, splat with variadic. So this would be passing it in that way, and we see what comes out. And I'll go and bump this view up over here so we can see that bigger. I don't know if that's a little easier to see. But if you're using the variadic and the splat again, something that's helpful, just for data cleanup purposes.
You were saying that the splat would require lots of arguments. That requires 6 arguments. So if you don't pass in 6 arguments, are we going to get a fatal error? Or?
Up on this one, yeah.
Yeah,
because you're not passing in all the arguments, you would get issues.
And you can type them?
Yeah, so like down here on the on this one, you could do, maybe you had a variadic, right? So we could say variadic, and then it would enforce that variadic rest would be passed in. So everything that is in the rest would be enforced that way. I think that's one of the most helpful ones because it's, you got to keep your data types correct. You got to keep things validated.
Unfortunately, you can't do those types until PHP 7.
The which ones?
I don't think you can't use natives in PHP 5.6, right? As parameters. It's only 7.
Yeah, I think that's right, based on what I've read.
That's what I read too.
Anyone on the internals emails? Those are kind of humorous, right? If you're not familiar with those are basically all the core contributors, those working on PHP. They have discussion about what features are going to be coming, about what's available. People will give input. They'll make a request for this specific feature, this specific functionality. The idea for PHP 5, or to go to PHP 7 instead of PHP 6 was all one of those. They made a RFC. They said, hey, we're going to want to go PHP 7. Everybody went and put their votes in. There's a few votes against. For the most part, they're all for going to PHP 7. So if you go check those out, those are they're interesting reads, is the best way to describe those. But they give you a lot of information about why things are happening in PHP and what new features are coming and the details are involved. All the tests that have to be in place, all the, you have your ducks in a row, right? So you have to have everything lined up if you want to make a request. You better come prepared if you want to have something. Which I would say is fairly typical. But PHP actually generally though is fairly open as well. Other things you can do in here, like for example, if you want to make sure they're all arrays, those kind of things you can go in here. So an example you were asking about, if you didn't pass in everything for lots of arguments, so we could come down and do $sign splat, lots of arguments, just pass in Bob and Alice.
It's kind of a runtime thing. Even if you use the splat operator, it would be a runtime error. So if you were to do like array pop off the splat and then or pass that in.
You get the nulls coming through. Null values if you don't pass the parameter. Even though they're not defaulted to null.
Yeah, that's kind of odd.
So and then over here, if we did, if we said variadic, it will have to go. I don't have a boot or an auto loader on here, but we'll just do. We go and hit that. Where did we get to? Where was that? One of those. Is it the empty array? Because nothing was variadic. So there's some, that's one of the helpful things there. If we go into the debug info one, so you can mess around with this one. You can go add various things into here. Like I said, you can use class variables, use anything debug-wise that may be helpful. You don't, generally speaking, you don't want to have debug code within your applications. You want to keep it separated. You don't want to have it in production doing stuff. So this would be a good example where maybe you want to break that apart, get some better information about what's going on. Or maybe if you have a unit test up against this thing, you could hit the debug info to get something out of it that you wouldn't normally want to get out of it.
Is debug info only called when you do a var dump and a var export?
Yeah, you can just do a var dump on it or export. Yep. So down here I have the var dump on the debug. We'll jump over to this one. Let's see, debug info. Go team, everything's awesome. The one I couldn't figure this one out, but the PHP version doesn't show up. And that just may be the global constant issue, I'm guessing. But that was an example of one that doesn't work. So I want to make sure I noted that in there so you can see that one. But everything else shows up. So maybe it's because it's not using a class value. I don't know. I really don't know that one why it didn't show up. But there's something to notice.
Probably need a backslash in front of it, maybe. That's weird.
Yeah, it should work out because it's a global.
It's not namespace.
Right, it's not namespaced. No namespacing in this one. So you know, in here you could add something more stuff, right? And you could have it be notion this some value dot more. No, I didn't get my. I got my. That's gonna be an issue, right? Yeah. I've ran into some issues in this debug one. Doesn't seem overly reliable, but it's there. So that it's there. It's helpful in some cases, I would say. With the crypt one, again, if you're using crypt, let's see, where's my crypt one? This is the, yeah. That one's there if it's available. And deprecated, like I said, HTTP raw post. If you're using HTTP raw post, before it wasn't, file get contents, the PHP input wasn't reusable. So if you're using it before, you could use it once and you couldn't use it after that, if you remember that. So it's made so that you can reuse it again and again, and then HTTP raw post is gone. So that's one that you may have to, this is one of the few that I've had to go change in code bases because it was referencing HTTP raw post. So just keep an eye out for that one. The substr compare, that one was kind of a gotcha. There's I can't remember her name. She has a talk where she does a bunch of trivia questions for PHP and a bunch of variable things. This is one of those that could be on there. What happens if you throw a 0 onto a substr compare? But the 0 there can really throw you off if you're not watching it. And maybe if you have a variable in there instead of an actual hard-coded value, you may run into that issue more than you would otherwise. So any other questions or any other examples you would like to see with PHP 5.6 specific? We've got a box up and running, PHP 5.6 on it. If you want to see any changes, anything different.
Go back to that debug info one.
Yeah.
Still trying to figure out why you're not getting your. How does the underscore debug info routine, how does that get invoked?
If you var dump the instantiated class.
Basically, the var dump
Magic method.
toString.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you do a string cast on an object and you have a toString magic method.
Because all you're getting when you do the var dump is just the two protected vars. Right? You're not getting PHP version or more stuff, so
Yes, this is one I poked around it for probably a couple hours. I couldn't figure out what made the difference. But some things would show up and some things wouldn't. And maybe it's a known issue. I don't know. But yeah, there are some things I just couldn't get to show up. I'm curious if we...
It looks like it's doing a regular var dump right now.
yeah, I don't think that debug info is not getting called. I mean, if you put a print statement at the top of that debug info function,
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
I just don't think it's getting invoked, right?
Right. It should be on the right. See, it should be 5.6 projects. Yeah, it should be correct. You could throw an echo in there, see what it's doing. So it is in, just to verify we're in the correct file, right? Sanity check.
Yes, if you drop that echo in the top of there.
I'm not sure if it'll display or not. We'll see. Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Not even calling it.
Right. Why wouldn't it be calling it? I don't know.
It's supposed to work.
Yes, it is. It is supposed to work. It is supposed to work. We won't. if someone wants to go pop up PHP.net and see if they can find out that one, maybe that was my problem on that one. Maybe you had to access it through different functionality. From the examples I saw, at least online, it was var dumps to access the debug info. I don't have a string on here, do I? Nope. Any other questions about PHP 5.6? So I want to say it's a, like it's not a whole bunch of magical stuff came out in PHP 5.6, but it is important to keep current. If you're using a JavaScript framework, maybe you want to keep that current. You got to keep doing that every year to maintain it at least, so you don't fall behind. PHP 5.6 is kind of the same thing. You're not going to hit some of the huge benefits like you did in PHP 5.5 and 5.4 with the traits and namespacing particularly, but at least it's something. It's something a little bit better than what you had before. And going back to that the early slides with this maintenance, as PHP 5.5 is about to be done with new features, and it'll enter the security phase only, it's an important thing to start looking at upgrading. If you're using the hash equals, which probably most people are, I'm guessing, at least if you're on PHP versions that support it, the timing issue there is addressed and fixed. That's a pretty major one to me, at least.
Can you show us the hash equals?
Yep. And this one, the only way to really test it is to run hash equals a whole ton of times and get some timing issues out of it, see what you get. This is just using crypt and then var dump and then hash equals just to check them. Or this is, the expected, the correct and incorrect. Going more into password hashing. Again, if using MD5, look at changing. I'm giving a talk tomorrow about security PHP. We'll go into rainbow tables. They're fun.
And why you should use encrypt.
Yes. Why you shouldn't be using MD5 or other older things, using newer stuff. All right. Any other questions there? Feel free to let me know if you have any questions about it. The code base is up there. The coding examples are up there on GitHub. The links are in the presentation slide or description on joined in. Get some feedback. Let me know what I can do better. If you like my talks, I've got 3 more coming up. Go check them out. The technical debt one this afternoon is exciting. Even I've given it a couple times already. This one I've given a few months ago. The other ones I've given another previously. Again, a plug to attend local user groups. If you're around here, there's the Utah PHP user group meeting that meets up in Draper. Plug, which is the Provo Linux user group. They meet here at UVU, just down on the south side of the campus. So there's a few user groups around here if you want to get more involved and then get to know some more people, do some networking. Great opportunity to do that. So, any other questions? All right. Enjoy your day. Thank you.